Welcome to another UU Talk. This time it's UU Architects. Our chalice lighting quote, "Buildings, too, are children of earth and sun." Frank Lloyd Wright. As always, I owe a great debt to my two main sources, Wikipedia and the UU Dictionary of Biography. But for this show, with its emphasis on beautiful buildings, Google image search was just as important. I found 5 major UU architects, but I never do a show on just 5 people, so I'll start with short bits on 19 other UUs. I have city planners, park planners, minor architects, and professors of architecture. Part 1 is called Close But No Cigar Factory. Part 2 is That's What I Call an Architect. And first up is Constantine the Great, a fricking emperor. Flavius Valerius Constantinus was born a Roman citizen in central Dacia, or modern Serbia. I have to justify him twice. How can I call him Unitarian when he ran the Council of Nicaea that decided Roman Christianity would be Trinitarian? And how can I call him an architect when he spent his life fighting and governing an empire? First answer, Constantine chose Trinitarianism at the Council of Nicaea, but he later changed his mind. When he was baptized, just before his death, he chose a Unitarian bishop for the job, while Trinitarian bishops stood there fuming. Second answer, he planned one of the world's greatest cities, Constantinople. He founded it in 330 CE on the border between Europe and Asia. For 750 years, it was the largest and richest city in Europe. This is an artist's reconstruction of how it looked in 1200, near its 900th birthday. The city was sacked in 1204 by Western Europeans and conquered in 1453 by the Ottoman Empire, but it remains a beautiful city, now Istanbul. Istanbul is a corruption of a Greek phrase which means, I'm going to the city. Thomas Jefferson was a deist, but often visited the Unitarian Church when in Philadelphia. He said, I confidently expect that the present generation will see Unitarianism become the general religion of the United States. A very poor prophecy, but very good UU credentials. I include Thomas for his lifelong project, building and renovating his mansion, Monticello. It's the building on the American nickel. This is the magnificent setting. Thomas began it when he was 25, and he never really stopped. I'm afraid Thomas loved Monticello too much. It cost a fortune, and he was always short of money. That wasn't completely his own fault. His father-in-law had huge debts, and due to a banking crisis, Thomas basically paid the same debts twice. Even so, his thirst for cash drove him to the worst acts of his life. When he needed cash, he would sell some slaves down south, where they had a much harder life. After Jefferson's death, Monticello was sold to pay his debts. Charles Wellbeloved was an English Unitarian. He helped Unitarians get a good reputation back when they could still be jailed for blasphemy. Charles was an amateur archaeologist. He wrote a book on York under the Romans and raised money to restore the Roman wall around the city. When York Minster Cathedral burnt in 1829, Charles raised funds for its restoration and got a letter of thanks from his theoretical arch nemesis, the Anglican Archbishop. Peter Cooper is not here for inventing Jell-O, although beautiful desserts are molded from it, nor for building America's first locomotive, nor even for being 19th century New York's richest real estate owner. No, Peter is here as an educator for the Cooper Union for the Advancements of Science and Art in Manhattan. It's a private college known for art, architecture, and engineering. It's tucked away on Cooper Square between 6th and 8th Street in the Bowery. Today there are 5 buildings. This is the original foundation building, changed but still recognizable. And this is 41 Cooper Square, the Irwin S. Channon School of Architecture. Henry Solly was a British Unitarian minister who founded social institutions for Britain's working poor. In 1884, age 71, Henry founded the Society for the Promotion of Industrial Villages. The idea was to provide a healthy place where the working poor of the new, overcrowded industrial city slums could thrive. His society was a failure, but his idea was not. He was a forerunner to Sir Ebenezer Howard's Garden City movement, which promoted suburbs with a decent town-country balance. Alonzo Horton was an entrepreneur, born in Connecticut and raised in upstate New York. He got his start by shipping grain to Canada. But he developed a persistent cough. His family said, "Might be tuberculosis. Move west for your health." Alonzo went to Wisconsin and sold land and cattle. Then he bought 1,500 acres and built a whole town, naming it Hortonville. Here it is today with 2,000 residents. But if you've never heard of Hortonville, perhaps you've heard of San Diego. Alonzo moved west for the California gold rush. When he found a sunny little town called San Diego, he sold everything to move there and make it grow. He added this bit called Horton's Addition, or Newtown, near the mouth of the bay. Alonzo made a lot of money selling land until Congress withdrew the funding earmarked to bring the Texas Pacific Railroad to San Diego. Real estate crashed. Many workers had already given Alonzo huge deposits to build homes for them. They went to him and said, "Keep our 1/3 down payment. Take back the land. Just let us out of our mortgages." Horton said, "No, I won't do that. Instead, here's all your money back. That's just the way I roll." Real estate recovered when the California Southern Railroad came to town in 1885, but it crashed again in the late 80s. Alonzo never did make a real fortune, but he didn't care. He said, "My principle is to be as happy as I can every day, to try and make everyone else as happy as I can, and to try to make no one unhappy." Those are good principles, and he lived to age 96. Yeah, I counted it. Henry David Thoreau built only one small cabin on Walden Pond, but it is one of the most famous buildings in America. Not, I admit, for its architectural merits. Ezekiel Straw started as a civil engineer in Manchester, New Hampshire, at what became the world's largest cotton mill. At its peak in World War I, they had 30 mills weaving 50 miles of cloth per hour. When Manchester incorporated in 1846, Ezekiel pretty much designed the whole city. He laid out streets and lots, established a Unitarian congregation, helped plan a dam, a canal, the waterworks, a gaslight company, a public library, a tool company, a fire insurance company, and the forerunner of the National Textile Association. George Mortimer Pullman, a Universalist, started Kentucky Fried Chicken. No, I'm kidding. This is the guy who created the Pullman sleeping car. George was mostly about railways, but he was also a civil engineer. When they were widening the Erie Canal, he and his father moved whole houses. As a young engineer in Chicago, he helped lay the sewer system. Chicago was built in a bog, and there was no point putting pipes under the mud. They laid the pipes above ground and buried them, raising downtown Chicago by 6 to 8 feet. Pullman's firm helped raise the buildings, including a 6-story brick hotel that they lifted with the guests still inside. Starting in 1880, George bought 4,000 acres south of Chicago, where he built a new plant and an entire town to support it. It had parks, churches, theaters, a hotel, and a library. For 14 years, it was studied and publicized as an ideal community, one where workers would be happy and productive, yet one that still made George a profit by collecting rent and running the stores and attractions. But no saloons, no independent newspaper, no town meetings. There was no one in church either, after none of the approved denominations would pay the high rent. It was a company town, 100%. Today, it is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Things went well until demand for Pullman cars fell off. George now becomes the villain of the story. To stay profitable, he laid off workers, reduced wages, and increased work hours per week. What he did not do was lower rents or reduce prices in his company stores. The workers went on strike. George just closed his house and left town. On June 26, 1894, all Pullman cars were removed from trains. Whole railroads shut down. On July 8, violence erupted between workers and soldiers guarding mail cars. By August, 33 workers were dead. Strike leader Eugene Debs was in jail, and the strike was broken. George won the battle, but he lost the war. A presidential inquiry found him at fault and forced him to sell the town, which became part of Chicago. George died 3 years after the strike. He was so hated that his family sealed his coffin in a concrete block and buried it under several layers of concrete, asphalt, and steel rails to keep his corpse safe from desecration. Alfred White was a reform-minded developer and philanthropist. His housing developments in Brooklyn won praise. They had large courtyards to encourage a neighborhood feeling. While skating at age 75, Alfred fell through the ice and drowned. His minister said, "I don't know any other one in all that 6 millions of New York City who would leave such a void as he does." I think you know Beatrix Potter's Tale of Peter Rabbit. Beatrix is in the show for making a park. She was a conservationist and left most of her 4,000-acre property to the National Trust. It was the largest gift up to that time, and it's part of Lake District National Park. Daniel Lamb was a Toronto manufacturer and politician, and this was his house. He was the founder and first manager of the Riverdale Zoo, 1890. Daniel got the ball rolling by acquiring 2 wolves and a few deer. He badgered his rich friends to keep the donations coming, and the zoo soon had many international animals, including 2 Indian elephants. Frankly, even the best old zoos were inhumane. Riverdale Zoo closed in 1975 with the opening of the larger and better Metro Zoo. The space is now Riverdale Farm. Dr. William Emerson was a great nephew of Ralph Waldo Emerson. William was an architect and first deacon of architecture at MIT. He expanded the curriculum to include classes on city planning and seminars on the practical challenges of working as an architect. He was also a founder of the Unitarian Service Committee. William had an interest in Byzantine architecture, too. This telegram to him was from Robert Van Nice when William appointed him to survey the Byzantine masterwork, the huge, ancient, and beautiful Hagia Sophia in Istanbul. For centuries, it was the largest building in the world. It was converted to a mosque under the Ottomans, and now it's a museum. Von Ogden Vogt, was a Midwestern minister whose theory of worship influences mainstream Protestantism to this day. To summarize his best-known book, Art and Religion, beauty is good, and the Catholics are beating us at it, so Protestants should shape up. A Unitarian philanthropist named Morton Hull found him convincing. Hull got the First Unitarian Church of Chicago to hire Vaughan and paid for a new building in the English Gothic style. Vaughan collaborated with the architect, who was Hull's son. Vaughan remained there for life, becoming minister emeritus at age 65. Nora Blatch was an architect. The American Society of Civil Engineers refused to admit her due to her sex, but in 2015, they granted her a posthumous fellowship. In a similar spirit, I granted Nora posthumous UU status, if she wants it or not. I'm cheating a bit. Her grandmother, Elizabeth Katie Stanton, and her mother, Harriet Blatch, were major Unitarian feminists. But Harriet, the mom, was a Unitarian atheist and refused to have Nora baptized. Kurt Vonnegut Sr. Reverend Stephen Epperson of Vancouver tracked this guy down for me. Every Halloween for many years, Rev Steve has taken on the persona of famous Unitarians and spoken on their behalf. Playing as Kurt Vonnegut Jr., the science fiction author shown at the bottom, he said, "Father was an architect, designed the Unitarian Church in Indianapolis along with his father, and being a businessman and this being Indiana, he had to join the Kiwanis. But to do that, he had to have a religion, because nobody wants to deal with a guy who isn't anything, has no religion, which in Indiana means he's just a wild man. So Father said he was a Unitarian." Florence Hope Luscomb was a suffragist and daughter of a single mom suffragist. She was among the first women to graduate from MIT with a degree in architecture and was hired by the first graduate, Ida Ryan. When construction slumped during World War I, Florence moved from part-time to full-time suffragist work and stayed in social action for life. So I have no buildings to show you. She is remembered as a stop on the Boston Women's Heritage Trail at the Hear Us exhibit inside the State House. Paul Howard Douglas was an economist, social activist, and a U.S. Senator from Illinois. He was raised Episcopalian, married a Jew, became a Quaker, and joined Unitarianism about age 60. He was an early environmentalist, leading the move to establish the Indiana Dunes State Park to prevent pollution by nearby steel mills. The last in this section, David Chernushenko was born in Calgary. He studied political science at Queen's and international relations at Cambridge. He lives in Canada and supports environmental causes, bringing social change in both business and government. On the business side, David is a green entrepreneur. Among other ventures, he has a consulting firm, Green and Gold, which advises on sustainable, socially responsible building design and practices.